The Galactic Council was the highest power in the galaxy. It was a place where leaders of all the various species met to make decisions about peace, trade, and sometimes war. The Council's golden chamber floated peacefully in space, a symbol of neutrality and order. But for all the peace it represented, there were things the Council avoided. One of those things was Deathworlders. Deathworlds were planets so dangerous that most species couldn't even survive for a single day on them. Earth, a planet that humans called home, was one of these Deathworlds. It had fierce storms, wild animals, and other threats that made it nearly impossible for most life forms to live there. The other Deathworld, Grelvac 7, was just as dangerous. It was a world where acid rain fell, and creatures hunted in packs, able to kill anything in their path. The Council had never invited Deathworlders to join. They had a rule to avoid them. The danger of Deathworlds was simply too much for any species to risk. But today, everything changed. The doors of the Council chamber slid open, and two figures walked in. The first was Commander Rhea of Earth, tall and calm. Her uniform was black, with a burning planet symbol on her shoulder. Her eyes were piercing, and her confident grin made it clear she wasn't afraid of anything. The second was Kale of Grelvac 7. He didn't wear any armor, his body marked with scars from countless battles. He carried a bone sword, glowing faintly, a weapon that showed just how deadly he was. His expression was serious, even grim, unlike Rhea's. As soon as they stepped inside, the room went silent. The Council members, a mix of strange alien beings from all across the galaxy, stared in shock. This wasn't supposed to happen. These two were Deathworlders. They weren't supposed to be here. Xylov, the Council leader, a creature made of soft, jelly-like material, was the first to speak. His voice was shaky as he addressed the two unexpected visitors. "You were not invited," he said, his voice betraying the fear many of the Council members felt. Rhea didn't seem fazed. She only smiled. "We don't wait for invitations," she replied, her voice calm but firm, as though it were obvious that they had every right to be there. She glanced at Kale, who stepped forward, his gaze cold and steady. "We've come with news, and a warning." The tension in the room grew even thicker. The Council members began to whisper among themselves. Some spoke in their native tongues, others in translations. The idea that two Deathworlders had entered their sacred space made them uneasy. Xylov, trying to regain control, floated closer to them. His form quivered slightly. "What could possibly be so urgent that you came here uninvited?" he asked, trying to sound confident. Rhea's smile faded, and her eyes became sharp. "It's not about what we bring. It's about what's coming," she said. She turned her head and glanced at the large holographic map in the center of the room. The map showed thousands of blinking stars, each one a different planet, each one a different world. The Council relied on this map to track the progress of the galaxy, its alliances, and conflicts. But today, it seemed like the map was too small for the news Rhea was about to reveal. "The galaxy is in danger. And you're not ready," she said softly, but the room could hear the weight of her words. The Council fell silent. No one had expected this. No one knew what the Deathworlders could possibly want, let alone what kind of warning they were bringing. Kale's voice cut through the silence. "The leech spawn. They're coming. And they're unstoppable." The words hung in the air, shocking everyone in the room. The leech spawn were legends, an ancient species no one had seen in centuries. The Council had been safe, but now it seemed the storm was finally arriving. Rhea looked directly at the Council leader, her expression serious. "You're not ready, and if you don't listen to us, you'll all fall." And with that, the Room knew this was no ordinary meeting. It was the beginning of something that would shake the galaxy to its core. The council chamber was filled with a heavy silence after the two Deathworlders' shocking revelation. The council members, who had once been calm and confident in their positions, now looked uneasy and uncertain. Rhea and Kale stood at the center of the room, unshaken by the gasps and murmurs around them. They had faced far worse in their lifetimes, danger that would make even the bravest alien species tremble. Now, they had to make the council understand the gravity of the threat they had come to warn about. Rhea, with her piercing eyes, locked onto Xylof, the leader of the council, who was floating nervously. She spoke again, her voice firm but calm. "The leech spawn are unlike anything you've ever faced," she said. "They are a species that travels across the galaxy, devouring entire systems, draining them of life." The other species in the room shifted uncomfortably. Some of them had heard of the leech spawn in ancient stories, but most thought they were myths, forgotten legends that had no place in the modern galaxy. But Rhea's words made it clear that these myths were real. Kale stepped forward, his serious face showing no sign of emotion. "We've seen them, we've fought them, and we've barely survived," he added. His voice was low and dangerous, as though remembering the battles he had fought against these creatures still caused him pain. The council members, though uneasy, began to murmur among themselves. Some of them scoffed at the idea that two Deathworlders, people from dangerous planets known for their survival skills, could be the only ones who had encountered this terrifying species. Xylof was the first to speak. "But how do we know you're telling the truth? How can we trust that the leech spawn are coming?" He looked at Rhea and Kale suspiciously, his jelly-like body quivering as he floated nervously. Rhea's expression didn't change. She had dealt with this before, people doubting her, questioning her every word. "We've tracked them for years. We've fought them in the darkest corners of space. They are unlike any other enemy you can imagine. And they're coming for you next." The room fell silent again as the weight of her words sank in. Some of the council members still didn't want to believe it. But there was a fear in Rhea's eyes, a cold certainty that made it impossible to dismiss what she was saying. "How do we stop them?" a representative from Fexer 3 asked, his voice shaking slightly. The creature from Fexer 3, known for its 3 heads, seemed genuinely terrified. This wasn't the kind of situation that could be dealt with through politics or diplomacy. It was something much bigger. Rhea glanced at Kyle, then back at the council. "You can't stop them with weapons alone," she said. "We tried that, and it didn't work." Kale's deep voice added, "You'll need more than just firepower. You'll need unity. Every species in this galaxy has to fight together. The fear the leech spawn spread is their greatest weapon. If you let them divide you, you'll fall." The room grew heavy with uncertainty. Some of the members exchanged glances trying to process what was being said. Unity. Cooperation. The idea sounded impossible to some. The council had always been a place of political games and secret alliances, but a true united front? That felt impossible. But the Deathworlders had made it clear. If they didn't unite, they would not survive. Xylof took a moment to collect his thoughts. "But we don't even know where to start. How do we fight something that feeds on fear? How do we prepare for an enemy we've never seen?" he asked. Rhea's gaze softened just slightly, but there was no softness in her voice. "We'll show you how. We've learned from the worst, and we'll teach you." Kale nodded in agreement. "But the choice is yours. You can wait and do nothing, and the leech spawn will wipe you out one by one. Or you can listen to us and fight as one." Rhea's eyes moved across the council members. You have one chance to prepare. Don't waste it. The room was silent as the weight of the situation pressed down on everyone. No one had expected this. No one had expected two Deathworlders to walk into the council chamber and speak with such certainty, with such authority. The galaxy, which had always thought itself invincible, was now facing a danger it had no answer for. And the two warriors from Deathworlds were the only ones who could show them how to survive. The tension in the room was palpable as the council members struggled to process the warning they had just received. The leaders, each representing powerful species from different corners of the galaxy, had always believed that their advancements in technology, their alliances, and their sheer numbers made them invulnerable to any external threat. But the presence of the Deathworlders, Rhea and Kale, had shattered that illusion. As the meeting continued, it was clear that not everyone was ready to accept the reality that had been presented to them. Some species believed they were strong, enough to handle any danger, even something as monstrous as the leech spawn. Others, however, were beginning to understand the severity of the situation. The room was divided between disbelief and fear, and the council members struggled to hide the anxiety creeping into their voices. Rhea and Kale, standing firmly at the center, remained calm and unwavering, knowing they had to make the council see the truth. They had faced the leech spawn firsthand and lived to tell the tale, but they understood that convincing others to act on their warning was the true challenge. Rhea spoke up again, this time with more urgency. "You can't wait any longer," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. "The leech spawn will come, and when they do, they won't leave until every living thing is consumed." The council members, though still hesitant, listened more intently now. The reality of the threat was beginning to sink in. But the skepticism didn't disappear entirely. One of the representatives from the Zrathor species, a tall, sleek being with elongated limbs, spoke up. "We've faced many threats in our time. What makes these leech spawn different? How do we know they'll come for us and not some other part of the galaxy?" he asked, his voice smooth and analytical. Kale stepped forward, his expression grave. "The leech spawn don't care about who you are or where you live. They come to feed. And once they begin, they won't stop until they've wiped out entire star systems." He paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. "They are relentless. They don't fear death. And they move quickly, almost as if they can sense fear itself. They feed on it, and once you feel it, you're already lost." The council fell silent again. The idea of fear being the leech spawn's weapon struck a chord with many. Fear was something they had all felt in different ways, but the thought that it could be weaponized by an enemy was unsettling. But it wasn't just the psychological aspect of the leech spawn that made them terrifying. It was their ability to destroy entire civilizations with horrifying efficiency. The creatures had no regard for borders, allegiances, or treaties. They only cared about their hunger, and that hunger was insatiable. Rhea's eyes scanned the room, taking in the varying reactions. "The galaxy isn't ready for this," she said. "You don't have the strength in your individual fleets to stand against them. And even if you did, it wouldn't matter. They'll tear through your forces like they're nothing." She paused, her gaze hardening. "But if you unite, if every species in this room sets aside their differences, you might have a chance." The council shifted uneasily. The idea of working together on such a grand scale was almost unheard of. There had been alliances, yes, but nothing like what Rhea was suggesting. Their history had been filled with political maneuvering, backstabbing, and broken promises. Trust didn't come easily. But Kale, standing next to Rhea, spoke again, his voice steady and unwavering. "The leech spawn are not something you can defeat with politics or negotiation. They don't care about your treaties, your armies, or your technology. The only thing that matters is unity. If you can't put aside your differences and fight as one, you won't survive." His words hung heavily in the air. The idea of true unity was daunting. The different species in the room had spent centuries building their power, each one thinking they were the strongest, the smartest, the most advanced. They had their own interests, their own goals, and the idea of giving up even a small piece of that for the sake of survival was something they weren't prepared to do. But the reality of the situation was clear. They had no choice. As the meeting continued, the room was filled with whispered conversations and heated debates. Some council members were still reluctant, convinced that the leech spawn would never reach them. Others were terrified, realizing that they might be facing an extinction-level event. But for all the uncertainty, one thing was becoming more apparent. The galaxy was in danger. The leech spawn were coming, and if they didn't act together, they would face annihilation. The question now was whether the council could set aside its pride and make the hard decisions needed to unite in the face of the greatest threat they had ever known. As the days passed, the council found itself at a crossroads. The tension in the room had not dissipated. Some species were still reluctant, skeptical of the Deathworlders' warning. But there was something undeniable about the gravity of the situation. The idea that they were facing a threat they could not fight alone was beginning to sink in. The meetings became less about debating the existence of the leech spawn and more about how to respond to their looming arrival. The council had spent centuries building political and military power, but this was different. This was a battle for survival, not power. The leaders of the galaxy were faced with an uncomfortable truth. If they did not unite, they would be wiped out. Rhea and Kale were the only ones who truly understood the nature of the enemy. Their experience was unparalleled, and though the council was still uncertain about how to proceed, there was a growing realization that they had no choice but to listen. The debate grew more heated as the council members discussed the possibility of combining their forces. Some leaders argued that they should create a united fleet, pooling resources from each species' military arsenal. Others suggested that a more diplomatic approach could be taken, negotiating with other factions to form alliances. But Rhea and Kale knew that such negotiations would take too long. The leech spawn were coming fast, and the galaxy couldn't afford to waste precious time. Rhea, tired of the endless debates, stood and addressed the room. "You're wasting time," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "The leech spawn don't care about treaties, alliances, or your political games. They care about one thing, devouring everything in their path. If you don't act now, it will be too late." The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air. Rhea's frustration was clear, but she knew she had to keep pushing. "You need to act as one. No more arguing, no more division. We'll show you how to fight. But you have to trust us." Kyle, standing beside her, spoke next. "The time for hesitation is over. You've seen the evidence, heard our warnings. Now, we need action." The council members, still reluctant, turned to Xylov, their leader, for guidance. Xylov floated nervously, his form pulsing with uncertainty. It was clear he understood the gravity of the situation, but the question remained. Would the galaxy be able to overcome its own divisions to stand together? After a long pause, Xylov finally spoke. "We cannot deny the reality of this threat," he said, his voice calm but filled with the weight of responsibility. "We will have to put aside our differences. But how do we unite so quickly? How do we prepare for such a massive battle?" Rhea looked at him with a mixture of resolve and understanding. "You won't do it quickly," she said, "but you'll need to start now. Every species must be willing to contribute, Not just their military forces, but their resources, their knowledge, and their resolve. This isn't just about war. It's about survival. Kyle nodded. You'll need to think beyond your borders, beyond your own species. The galaxy must work together if it has any hope of stopping the leech spawn. Zylov's gaze shifted from Rhea to Kale, and for the first time, the council saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. The path forward would not be easy. There were centuries of mistrust and rivalry between the species that made up the council, but the threat posed by the leech spawn was too great to ignore. The meeting stretched on as the leaders began to discuss specifics. Plans were drawn up for a joint military force, a combined fleet that would take the fight directly to the leech spawn. But even as they began to organize, the question lingered. Would it be enough? Rhea and Kale knew that combining forces was just the beginning. They had fought the leech spawn before, and they knew that strength alone wouldn't be enough to defeat them. The real challenge would be facing the fear the leech spawn could instill. Fear was their weapon, and if the galaxy wasn't careful, that fear could tear apart the newly formed alliance. As the council meeting drew to a close, the leaders made a decision. They would take the fight to the leech spawn, but it would take every ounce of courage, strength, and unity they could muster. The galaxy was shaking, but it hadn't fallen yet. And for the first time, the council was beginning to see that the only way forward was together. The final part of the story saw the culmination of the council's decision to unite and prepare for the battle against the leech spawn. As the galaxy's most powerful species came together, they faced the daunting task of coordinating their efforts. It wasn't just about military strength. The leech spawn weren't like any enemy they had faced before. They weren't just a physical threat, they were a psychological one as well. The fear they instilled in their victims was powerful, capable of weakening even the most hardened warriors. Rhea and Kale, despite their earlier frustration, began working alongside the council to train the unified forces. They shared their knowledge of the leech spawn, explaining their tactics and their weaknesses. The key to defeating them wasn't just brute force, but understanding the nature of the fear they spread and how to counteract it. It was a delicate process, one that required the galaxy's leaders to put aside their egos and fears and focus on the task at hand. As they prepared, the combined fleets of the galaxy began to assemble. The ships, once representing the military might of different species, now stood side by side, ready for a war unlike any they had ever fought. But despite the preparation, doubt still lingered. Would they be ready in time? Would their combined forces be enough to stand against a creature that thrived on fear and destruction? These questions remained unanswered, but the galaxy had no choice but to move forward. As the day of the confrontation neared, Rhea and Kale continued to push the galaxy's forces to their limits. They had seen the leech spawn's power firsthand, and they knew that time was running out. The combined fleet began to take shape, but it wasn't just about ships and soldiers. It was about unity. The leaders of the different species had to work together, setting aside centuries of distrust and rivalry. There were tense moments, times when it seemed like old grudges would tear the alliance apart. But slowly, through persistence and shared purpose, they began to form a bond stronger than any of them had anticipated. Rhea and Kale watched with a mixture of pride and worry. They had done all they could to prepare the galaxy for what was to come, but there was still no guarantee that they would succeed. The fear they had warned about was still very much alive in the hearts of the leaders. But as they stood together, on the eve of battle, something shifted. The galaxy was no longer divided by species and old alliances. For the first time, they were all united against a common enemy. As the battle began, the fleets of the galaxy moved into position, ready to face the leech spawn. The dark, twisted forms of the creatures appeared on the horizon, their very presence sending waves of dread through the fleet. But despite the fear, the galaxy's forces stood firm. Rhea and Kyle led the charge, their experience proving invaluable as they directed the forces in the fight. The battle was fierce, and the leech spawn's terrifying ability to instill fear seemed unstoppable. But the galaxy's forces fought on, pushing back against the overwhelming dread. In the end, it wasn't the size of their fleets or the power of their weapons that won the day. It was their unity. They had overcome the fear, working together as one to defeat the leech spawn. The galaxy was saved, but the victory came at a cost. Rhea and Kale, though victorious, knew that the battle was just the beginning. The galaxy had been shaken, but it had also been forever changed. The species of the galaxy had learned the true meaning of unity and sacrifice. They had faced an enemy that none of them could have defeated alone, and in doing so, they had forged a bond that would last for generations. The galaxy had not only survived, it had evolved. The leech spawn were defeated, but the legacy of that battle would shape the future of the galaxy for centuries to come. As the last of the leech spawn retreated, the fleet turned back, their mission complete. Rhea and Kale stood at the helm of the flagship, watching as the stars stretched out before them. The galaxy had faced its darkest hour and emerged stronger. But both knew that peace was fragile. The galaxy would need to stay united, always ready for the next challenge that would inevitably arise.